Hi everybody, welcome back to another Sewcialites 3 block video. Today we're going to be working on block number 8. Block number 8 is called the Beacon Block, designed by Amy Smart. They have this as a beginner level block, so I'm going to introduce a couple of different things today to help make our sewing more efficient. I already sewed my 6-inch block off camera. It did come up a little bit short, but all my blocks are coming up short, so I'm not worried about that. I'm going to sew the 9-inch block for you today on camera. I've already selected and cut my fabrics. One thing I wanted to show you was my fabric C. If you look at the picture, fabric C is yellow. I picked a directional fabric with stripes, so I had to think about, did I want my stripes running the same way through the entire block or through each of the flying geese? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's my fabric C's. When you cut something that's directional, if the piece is rotated differently throughout the block, you need to think about how you're cutting your fabric. I went ahead and I cut them all the same. So when I put my block together, there's a flying geese right here at the top, at the bottom, and then at the sides. So the stripes are going to turn this way. So I'll have two with stripes running this way and two with stripes running this way. If I wanted all the stripes running one direction, when I cut these pieces, I just had to rotate how I cut it and make sure that I measured it correctly, and then all the stripes would be running the same. When I put my block together, my fabric C's will look like that. I'm fine with that. Another thing that I can pay attention to when I'm sewing, if you look at how this is cut, I have a darker stripe here and a darker stripe here. And that's the same throughout each of these rectangles. So when I'm making my flying geese, I need to pay attention to where I put my corner squares. If I want the dark line here to be in the center, like that, so that they look like mirror images of each other, I need to take a little bit of extra time and be careful when I'm putting my fabric D's on the corner of my fabric C. So we'll look at that when we get to that step. Our half square triangle units, the A and the B and the A and the E, are measured to come out oversized, and then we can trim down, which means they're going to be nice and accurate. I'm going to use my 6.5-inch triangle square up ruler. I've shown that I think once before. I'll show you again how to use it with this block. We're also going to talk about using diagonal seam tape today. You'll see the tape has a red line down the center, and the black lines on either side of the red line are 1/4 inch away. Using this can eliminate having to draw those lines on the back of your squares. So I haven't drawn any lines on my squares today. I'm going to show you how to use this, how it goes on your sewing machine, and how you use the lines on either side of the red. Let's go ahead and get started. One thing about this block is it gives you a chance to work on multiple things at once. It can help streamline your sewing and make it go a little bit faster. What you can do, if you're comfortable, instead of working beginning to end, is look at things that are similar. So let's look here at our first step. We have the A and the B. They have you drawing the line on the wrong side of fabric A, corner to corner, and then we're sewing 1/4 inch away. If you're drawing lines, you probably want to draw 3 lines. We did do that in one of the videos where you draw a line down the center and then another line 1/4 inch away and another line 1/4 inch away, to sew on. You can do that. I'm going to show you how to use the seam tape, but let's get these fabrics ready. So you know you're going to need your fabric A and your fabric B, and it says we're going to make 4. You can see there's 2 fabric B's because each one of these is going to make 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I need 2 fabric A's. So you're not using all your fabric A. These are going to go right sides together, and then we'll sew them at the sewing machine. Now looking further down our instructions, I'm going to go to this step here, A and E. Here's my fabric E's. They're going together the same way. So we can line these up to sew at the same time. Put our fabric A on the back, and I know I'm not lining them up perfectly because we're going to go sew it on the sewing machine, and I'll adjust it there. You'll notice my fabric E is directional. When I go to make the half square triangle, I can think about, do I want it to look like that? Do I want it to look like that? I'm okay with sewing it either way, so I'm going to lay that down right there. And then the step here is where we're going to make our flying geese. So I have my fabric C and my fabric D. You just need to be able to keep track of all your fabrics. If you do this, take a picture with them all labeled so you don't lose track, which is what I did before I started. I'm going to lay out these 4. Here's my dark line at the bottom like I was talking about, and we can lay out 4 of these, because these we're going to sew corner to corner. We've done that before to make flying geese, corner to corner, corner to corner, corner to corner. Now when I take this over to my sewing machine, all of this is ready to be sewn at the same time, rather than sewing these 2, cutting them, ironing them, trimming them, and then doing this, and making the flying geese, and then doing this. This gives you kind of an assembly line. It can make your sewing go a little bit faster. Let's head over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how to use the diagonal seam tape. You might notice something a little bit different about the featherweight this time. If this is the first video you're watching of mine, this is a 1955 Singer 221 featherweight. This table, it's by a company called So Steady. You see that just slides right next to the featherweight, and now I have a bigger workspace rather than just having this small tray. I need the bigger workspace to work with this diagonal seam tape. There's a little bit of paper right here, and then under the tape right here, I'm just protecting that gold detailing. The tape shouldn't peel that up, but I wanted to just provide a little extra protection just in case. Now, I did have a short piece of tape without this bed on, but when you go to sew the squares, you need to see the lines kind of coming and going. So if I'm just using the regular bed of the machine, it ends here. The tape won't work very well. I need to be able to see this nice straight line right here. Let me show you how this works. Here we are in front of the machine. The red line right here lines up with your needle. So there's the hole right there on my needle plate where the needle is. You want to line that up and bring the tape straight out. One thing I like to do is notch out the sides of the tape. That gives me room for the feed dogs on either side. You don't want to put the tape over the feed dogs because then you can't sew, but you want to get this as close to that needle as possible to make sure it's coming out straight. Let's look at our first piece of fabric. So we have an A and a B. Let me just line them up. I have a piece of scrap fabric here because the light is kind of bright. So when we're looking at this slowly, that's just blocking the light. Here's our first fabric square. I don't have it pinned. I know this is oversized and I can trim it down because I already made my 6-inch block. So if it's a little bit shifted, I'm not too worried about it. I'm looking at the black line here and here. I'm going to slide this forward, make sure my corner is still lined up here. You can see my needle is right there. We're going to sew our first line, and by using the tape, we know we're 1/4 inch away from our needle. There's our first line of stitching. That's the line that I just sewed by lining up here and here. There's your line of stitching, 1/4 inch away. There's 2 ways you can do the next line. Slide it over. Follow that way. Make sure you're on your 1/4 inch there. Or, for some reason, I got in the habit of doing this. I turn it around and I go like this. Either way, this just always sews on this side for me. I think I like consistency rather than having a line sew here and then having a line sew here. For some reason, I just developed the habit of flipping it, but either side will work. There really is no reason to flip it. It's just something that I do. I'm going to sew the second line. The one thing that's a little hard to get used to about sewing with this is you're not always looking here. When you're stitching and when this is moving through your machine, you're watching the corner because you don't want this sliding. You need to make sure it stays lined up, lined up, lined up, all lined up here as it moves through so you get your proper seam allowance. We've got the rest of our pieces to sew. It's really hard to sew with this here. I'm going to have to move it. I hope that's not too bright on camera. This is the first A and B. I've got my next A and B, and remember we laid out all of our fabrics. I have the A and B, and then I have 2 A and E's, and then we have 4 of the flying geese. So I can run them all in a row. That's what I meant at the beginning by being efficient with your time. You can just chain piece so you're not cutting the thread in between. So you're going to see a bunch of things move through. For the C and D, I'm lining up the corner along the red because we're actually sewing corner to corner. So I'm not using the 1/4 inch over there or the 1/4 inch over there. I'm using the red in the center, lining up my needle with the corner, sewing straight, and going to the other corner. So as you're moving this one through like this, you keep it lined up on the red, and that's going to help you get this to the corner of your block. So then you've just sewn corner to corner and you didn't have to draw a line. I've got 3 more of those to sew. Now I have them all sewn, but they're all linked together. So you just want to separate them. And the first 3, I have the A and the B, the A and the E, and the A and the E. They need another line of stitching. Now the flying geese I'm going to set aside because before I can sew on the other square, we actually have to trim and flip and press these. So we're just going to set these aside, and then I'm going to stitch the other line on these. Now I have my 2 A and B's, my 2 A and E's, and half of our 4 flying geese, the C and D's, done. Let's head over to the cutting station. The first ones I'm going to cut are going to be the flying geese. These are really easy. We don't have to use anything special. We're not measuring anything. We just want to cut a 1/4 inch away, and I did show it last time. You can always double check before you cut. Flip it up. Is it looking nice and straight? Looks good, okay to cut. If you're flipping your corner up and it's really wonky, you want to go ahead and pick it out and then restitch it. Make sure you're going corner to corner. Let's go ahead and trim these. Next we're going to trim all of our squares. I'm going to turn them over. I think it'll be easier to see. A and E, and these 2 are the same, so these are my A and B's. We're going to cut these down the center, and then I'm going to use my triangle square up ruler, and we'll measure our triangles. And I can tell I did not stitch them perfectly, but again, it's going to be fine because these are oversized and we have the opportunity to trim them down. So go ahead and get all your triangles separated. You want to grab your instructions. I'm sewing the 9 inch, so it tells me that my triangle unit is going to measure 2 3/4 by 2 3/4 for the A and B, and also 2 3/4 by 2 3/4 for the A and E. So these are all going to measure the same. Looking at this ruler, you'll see it has half marks on this side, 1 1/2, 2 1/2, 3 1/2, 4 1/2, 5 1/2, 6 1/2. Hole marks on this side, 1 through 6. And then we've got our little smaller marks on the side here. These are our 1/8 and 1/4 inch marks. So we need 2 3/4. Let's grab one of our triangle units. I'm going to line up along the seam line. When I lay this down, let's just lay it down on the 3 inch. You can see right now it fits at the 3 inch. So if I open this and press it, it's going to give me a 3 inch square. So if you're not working with one of these kinds of rulers, you can open it, press it open, you'll have 3 inches, then you'll need to trim it down to 2 3/4. So you would get a regular ruler. I like to use the diagonal line. It helps you line things up. So you would line it up 2 3/4, 2 3/4. Make sure this is lined up on your seam. Let's go ahead and just trim this one together, okay? So there's 2 3/4 and 2 3/4 on that side. And then the only thing I have to trim off on this side is what they call a dog ear, a little bit of extra. This one's now 2 3/4. When you're trimming that way, I would say press it first. Give it a nice press before you measure and trim. I just am doing that because I'm in front of the camera. Let's grab this ruler. This works a little bit differently. I'm going to lay this down. Let's do the same one so I don't get my triangles mixed up. 3 inches isn't right. I need to pull it down. That's 1/8 of an inch. That's 1/4 of an inch. It's a black line with kind of a white surround to it, and I'm lining that up right there, right along my seam, 2 3/4, 2 3/4. You can see not much is going to come off, which is what happened with the first one that we trimmed. So I'm going to trim that. Get that out of the way. And then you would take it and press it. And this should measure 2 3/4. Let's grab our ruler. It looks good. There's 2 3/4, and I do need to press it. It's going to be 2 3/4. It's just not laying flat, but that's going to be a 2 3/4 square once it's pressed. And then you cut off the little dog here. So that's 2 ways to trim your triangles. If you press them first before you trim and you notice you've got one that's a little wonky, here's another way you can measure it. I've got my diagonal line. I'm going to measure it a little bit larger. So here's 2 3/4. I've got a little extra there. 2 3/4, a little extra there. Make sure though you've got your diagonal nice and lined up. I'm going to go ahead and hold that down and trim these 2 sides. And then you turn it. Now you know you have 2 straight sides. Now you're going to line up your 2 3/4, your 2 3/4, and this should line up, and it does. And now you can trim the other 2 sides. That's what you do if it's not completely straight when you press it. I've got all my half square triangles trimmed and pressed, and I have this part of the flying geese pressed. We need to go do the other 4 corners for these units. We need to sew the last 4 of our flying geese units. So again, right side down, corner to corner. I'm using the red line on the diagonal seam tape. I'm going to do the same thing with this side. I'm going to check them all at the cutting table. This one's a little bit off, but not so much off that I care to redo it. I'm going to go ahead and check them all, trim them all, press them open, and then we'll start laying out our block. I've got all my pieces ready. I want to have my picture here right next to me. If you like the letters, you can look at the front. Let's lay everything out and make sure we get it correct. We're going to start with an A and B. You should have 4 A and B's. Here's my A and B's. The B's are going to point toward the center. So all of my pink needs to point toward the center. There's my A and B's. Next I'm going to grab the flying geese. And for the flying geese, these point out. See how the point is here, pointing toward the outside of the block. So make sure you point those out. You can point them in if you want. It's just going to look different. Put that out, 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 and out, and they all came out correct. I had them all lined up. You can see I've got a dark line here and then a dark line closer to the top. Looks good. Your E's all point in toward the center, the dark color. And in the picture there's like a pink E here and a red one here. The stripe may not have been the best choice because I have stripe here. Do you see that? Let's see how this looks. This is actually red and this is pink. They're different, but it's really hard to tell the difference. I think I'm going to change out these 2 squares. I'm going to put this in instead. Alright, here we go. Let's try that. Oh, that's much better. It's still a lot of pink, but that looks much better than having all stripes. I like that so much better. So I'm going to start by sewing these together and these together and these together. Let's go ahead and head over to the sewing machine. Since I have the diagonal seam tape on here, I could use that if I want, using that to measure your 1/4 inch seam, lining it up like that and sewing. But I really do prefer using my guide foot for that. I'm going to go ahead and take that off, and I'm going to change out the foot and use my guide foot. Let's have a look at everything. I need to go to the iron. Looks pretty good. I can tell it's not perfectly straight, especially right here. Can you see that? It's off a little bit. You know me. I'm leaving it. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. If you're a precision quilter, I'm probably driving you crazy, but I've mentioned it before. It's worth repeating. I sew because I enjoy sewing. I use my quilts. I am not overly concerned with them being perfect. This looks good. Let's look at those 2 center squares. They're a little off. See that? That should match and come to a point. It is together here, nice and straight at the bottom, so I'm going to live with that point not being perfect. I'm okay with that. If I wanted to, I could seam rip this and slide this up, get the point to match. This would be a little crooked, and then I would have to adjust for it when I sewed these 2 rows together, but it's fine. I'm just not overly concerned with it. Same thing here. I'm going to press these, or just finger press since I'm sitting here at the sewing machine, toward the red, and then the seams will nest. I really should pin this. I can tell right now I'm going to have a bit of a wonky block, but that's okay. But we'll adjust for it when we put this piece into the center of the block. Here we go. I do need to go press this. When I press this part, I'm going to press this seam open. That's what I did on the 6-inch. It makes it less bulky here in the center. Let's look at this wonky center unit. If you look on the instructions for the 9-inch block, it should measure 5 by 5. You can see it is not even all the way around. Here's my 5-inch ruler. I've got the little bullseye in the center. I'm going to line that up. I've got some extra. I lucked out. We'll go ahead and trim it. It's still not going to be perfect, and I'm still going to have to be careful as I'm sewing it in. I'm just going to move my cutting mat here. And we'll go ahead and trim the other sides. This is very realistic quilting. It's almost lunchtime. I'm kind of getting hungry. There we go. So you can see it's not straight here. This looks good. This looks good here. So the top and the bottom look really good. The sides are a little bit off. So when I go to sew this into my block, I need to account for the short edge. I'm breaking out the pins for this one. We're going to sew this to this. Now, this is correct. This is short. So when I put this down, and when I pin, I want to make sure that I keep it along that line. I'm going to add some pins. Make sure it's straight. I want to keep it straight on the top there as well. There we go. I'm going to add one of those funny pins. I think I showed that last time, just to make sure I'm keeping it straight. See, I keep poking myself. That's why I'm not really feeling like pinning today. And here it looks like it's a little short, or my flying geese unit might be off. Let's measure the flying geese unit before I go ahead and sew this whole thing together. This should be 2 3/4 by 5. It's bigger than 5, you see? That would be why you measure all your pieces, which I didn't do, so I apologize. 2 3/4 by 5. I should have done that before I put those pieces together. So my top and bottom are probably going to be a little bit off. And let's measure the other one. Let's see if that's 5. Yeah, the top and the bottom are going to be off. I should have measured those. So let's say you're hurrying and doing things you shouldn't do like I did today. What do you do? If I want, I can go back and rip this apart if I think I need to. Let's measure it. No, it looks fine. That's about 5. Okay on that one. And let's measure this one. That one could have been trimmed just a little bit, but since it's all sewn together, I'm not going to worry about it. We're okay top and bottom. That's good. So I really should have measured those first. Going back to what we were doing, pinning. Like that. I'm going to turn it back over. Just add that extra pin. Keep that straight. Make sure this is nice and straight. Now it's going to fit nicely. Do you see that? Now we're lined up real nice. A little bit of fabric fraying. I really need to change that rotary blade. So when I sew, this right here will get taken up in the seam allowance. You'll never know it was short. That's that side. And on this side, I want to line up with this piece here. So same thing, line up, and you'll see some of the fabric underneath because it's crooked. But it's going to come out straight because I'm pinning and we trimmed it. Let's go ahead and finish pinning. Let's go sew these 2 seams. Let's have a look at that. Here's where we lined up where it was straight, and here's where it was a little short. You see how it got caught up in the seam allowance? It's fine. Same thing on this side. This was the correct size right here. These I pressed out toward the dark. You can press them any way you want. There's a little bit of bulk when I press in. These actually want to press out. Do you see that? They really want to press out. So what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and press these out, take these back, and press them in. That way all my seams will nest. There were no pressing instructions. There's no arrows on here. Up to you how you do your pressing. Here's the back. I repressed these so they're pressing in. These are going out and these are going in. I am going to pin this because it's a little bit wonky. We're going to go like this. The seams are going to nest, so they'll lock in really nice. This looks really good. I'm surprised. Everything is lining up very nicely. Pleased with that. Let's get the rest of it pinned and see how it goes. then you'll see this kind of has a bump. That's going to come out when I sew too. When I sew, as you're sewing, I'm barely pulling this. That's what's going to make that lie flat. If you find that you really have to pull your fabric like you're holding it and leaning back like you're water skiing, that's not good. You don't want that. Let's go ahead and pin that center seam. And I think I've mentioned this before, but just in case I haven't, I'm pinning at an angle. So as I'm sewing, I can pull the pins down and out. I'm ready to go ahead and sew my 2 seams. We're over at the iron because I want to show you something. I sewed the last 2 seams. Do you see how this is wavy like that? The same thing here, it's got a little bit of a wave. Before you open this and press it, grab your iron, and they call this setting the seam. I'm just going to set it right on that seam and make it nice and flat. In fact, you can do the whole block if you want. You'll get a better result when you do your final press to press those last 2 rows out. If you set that seam and get it nice and flat, that looks better. Not quite as wavy, not quite as wonky. You can kind of hold it, help it to lay flat. If you've got clappers, which I do, I've got a few behind the camera over here. They're on top of another project. You can set the clapper on top and let it lay nice and flat and let it set for a minute. Let the block cool, and then you can go ahead and open those last 2 rows. I'm going to just press them out. There are no pressing instructions for those last 2 rows. I'm going to let this sit for a bit, do the final press, and then we'll have a look at it and see how I did for size. Here's the back of the block. I pressed everything out. Let's flip it over. Look at that. All the wonkiness, all the problems. It's really not all that bad. My corners here don't perfectly match. Same here. And you'll see I lost my corners up here, which doesn't surprise me because I had that problem with the centerpiece. And again, when I sewed this on, I forgot, I think I did this last time too, to watch for my corner seams on the back. I was so concerned with making sure I had it pinned and I got the center part in straight. I wasn't thinking about the points. Let's give it a measure. I've got my 10-inch square ruler here. Here's my 9.5 and 9.5. It's short. Do you see that? When I line up the 9.5 right along the edge of this block, I can see some of the blue underneath. This is lined up. This really isn't that bad on top, actually. Let me make sure that's all lined up. That's pretty good. In fact, a little bit needs to come off right there. But the rest of it's short, which again, doesn't surprise me. All of my blocks have been short, so I'm not going to worry about it. We talked a little bit about the finishing with the setting blocks and how to account for that, so we'll revisit the short block issue at the end. Let me show you my 6-inch block. Here's my 6-inch block, which is also short. It should be 6.5 inches. It's about 6 1/4. The 6-inch version I'm sewing with Strawberry Lemonade by Sherri and Chelsi, Moda Fabrics. And the 9-inch I'm sewing with Laundry Basket Quilts, Little Sweetheart, and Cloud 9. This came out better as far as the corners. Do you see that? I didn't lose my corners, my points. Everything there looks good. That's because I didn't change my center fabric. Now, I didn't pin when I sewed this, so some of the things are a little bit wonky. I'm not concerned with that. If you're concerned and you want more precision quilting, you can always watch the Fat Quarter Shop tutorials. I believe she uses the triangle paper, triangles on a roll, Flying Geese quilt block foundation paper. I just don't prefer using papers, and I'm not overly concerned with getting it just so. Thank you so much for joining me on today's quilting adventure for sewing block 8, the beacon block for Sewcialites 3. Let me know how your blocks turned out. Any comments or questions, please leave them for me below. I'd definitely like to know how you feel about me leaving in the mistakes. Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? I feel like leaving in the mistakes can help you avoid those potential mistakes, because if I do it wrong and you see me do it wrong, you know what not to do. I hope your blocks are coming out great. I will be back again next week for block number 9. I'll do the same thing. We'll sew the 9-inch on camera. I'll sew the 6-inch off camera, and then we can have a look at both of them. Thank you so much for sewing along with me. I'll see you next time.